Hey friends, thank you for being here tonight. Whether you're a returning listener or just stumbled in looking for peace and a good story, I'm glad you've joined me. We're heading back to ancient Greece, not for the usual gods and greatest hits, but for the deep cuts, the hidden gems barely visible behind Hercules' abnormally big biceps and Achilles' crowd of simps. You've heard of the legends everyone talks about, but what about the hero who fought a sea monster and still had time to argue with his in-laws? Or the one who saved a whole city and got paid in slightly nicer sandals? These are the stories of the unsung, the bold, the brilliant, and sometimes the bewildered, and I promise they're just as grand, just as moving, and maybe even more human than the names carved into temple walls. Before we begin, if you enjoy what I do, if these tales help you wind down, escape, or just feel a little more connected, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps keep this going, not to mention goodwill from the algorithmic fates. And drop a comment too. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is when you join me. I'd love hearing from you, but enough of that. Now take a deep breath, get cozy, listen to the lyre slowly fade into the Aegean, and let these ancient tales carry you into your own journey. You've earned this rest, and I've got a story or two to tell you. The story of Philoctetes is one of those classic cases of heroism that seems to go horribly wrong, and yet in the end works out in the most unexpected way. Philoctetes, born to the warrior Poias, was one of those rare heroes whose archery skills were so exceptional that even Heracles, yes, the demigod who literally wrestled lions, slew hydras and stopped rivers, decided, you know what, this guy should carry my bow. And so, the legendary Heracles' bow was passed to Philoctetes, making him the ultimate marksman of his time. With his ability to shoot with incredible accuracy, he could have probably hit a bullseye from 100 yards away, while blindfolded standing on one foot and juggling flaming torches. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. Everything seemed to be going great for Philoctetes. He had the best bow, a future filled with legendary battles, and a chance to make a name for himself as a key figure in the Trojan War. But, as the ancient Greeks liked to remind everyone, life had a habit of throwing a curveball. While on the way to Troy, things took a nasty turn when Philoctetes was bitten by a snake on the island of Lemnos. And not just any snake. This one had a venom that caused a horrendous infection. To top it all off, the wound began to smell so terrible that even the most seasoned warriors began to wonder if it was worse than a centaur's gym locker room. Naturally, being the compassionate heroes they were, the Greeks decided the best course of action was to abandon Philoctetes on the island. Their reasoning? We can't deal with the stench, let's just leave him there and move on. Now that's some real heroic behaviour, right? Leave the guy who's carrying Heracles' bow, the one thing that could win the war, stranded in the middle of nowhere because, well, he smells bad. Classic. But Philoctetes wasn't one to be defeated so easily. He survived on Lemnos for nearly a decade, living alone with only his bow and his frustration. Through all the pain and loneliness, he clung to his weapon, perfecting his skill, and secretly plotting the day he'd finally make those who abandoned him wish they hadn't. Maybe they were getting some karma in their future. After all, who leaves a guy with a magic bow on an island? Bad move, Greeks. Bad move. After Philoctetes had been abandoned on Lemnos for years, living in isolation, nursing a horrible snake bite, and developing a deep distrust for anyone who didn't bring a bottle of air freshener, the Greeks realised something important. They needed him. Why? Well, it turns out that the whole Trojan War thing wasn't going as smoothly as they'd hoped. The prophecy was clear. The war would not end without Heracles' bow. And guess who had that magical weapon? That's right, the very archer they had ditched. Funny how that works out, isn't it? So after much soul-searching, and probably a lot of awkward meetings with the Greek leaders, the Greeks sent Odysseus and Diomedes to Lemnos to bring Philoctetes back into the fold. Now, you'd think that after all that time they might show up with a big apology cake or a grand gesture, but no, they basically just knocked on his door and said, "Hey, we need that bow. Want to come back to Troy? We promise not to leave you alone this time." Philoctetes was understandably not impressed. After all, they had abandoned him for years with only his bow and painful memories as companions. So when Odysseus and Diomedes arrived to ask for his help, Philoctetes didn't immediately jump at the chance to help the Greeks win the war. Instead, he gave them a hearty lecture on how betrayal stinks, and not just in the literal sense. "You left me here," he said, shaking his head. "Left me alone for years to rot on an island, with nothing but this stinking wound and my bow. And now, you come here asking for my help. No apology, no sorry for abandoning you, just a, hey, can you help us win the war?" But of course, even Philoctetes, with all his anger and resentment, knew that the Trojan War was the most important thing happening in the world. He had spent years thinking about this moment. Could he hold a grudge forever? Could he really sit this one out and let the Greeks flounder without him? The decision was tough, but after a good bit of grumbling and probably a lot of thinking, Philoctetes agreed to return with Odysseus and Diomedes, ready to join the Greeks once more, under one condition. If they wanted him back, they had to promise that they would never leave him behind again, no matter how bad the situation got. No more islands, no more betrayals, no more suffering alone. If they wanted Heracles' bow, they had to accept Philoctetes in all his glory and in all his stinky, bitter, heroic splendour. Once he rejoined the Greek army, it didn't take long for Philoctetes to prove that he was more than just the guy who had been abandoned. He was the hero who had helped turn the tide of the war. His bow, which had been left behind all those years ago, was now the weapon that ultimately led to the downfall of Troy. Philoctetes' skill with the bow was unmatched. When the moment came to strike, it was Philoctetes' arrow that killed Paris, the prince of Troy, fulfilling the prophecy and marking the end of the war. In a way, the Greeks had no one to blame but themselves for waiting so long to call on Philoctetes. But the irony of his return wasn't lost on anyone. Philoctetes had been the hero they couldn't live without, but only after they had left him behind for so long. His ultimate victory was just as much about forgiving the Greeks for their betrayal as it was about exacting revenge on the Trojan forces. Returning to the Greek army was no easy feat for Philoctetes. Though the Greeks had begged him to come back, and he had agreed, eventually his heart was still heavy with years of betrayal and suffering. The Greek army was, in many ways, the same group of people who had abandoned him on the island of Lemnos, leaving him to endure his wound and isolation for nearly a decade. Sure, they came with promises and apologies, but how could Philoctetes easily forget what they had done to him? When Philoctetes first rejoined the ranks of the Greek army, he couldn't help but feel like a shadow of his former self. Yes, he still had Heracles' bow, the weapon that would bring the Greeks their victory, but something had changed inside him. The old Philoctetes, the one who was full of fire and vengeance, was now replaced by a more thoughtful and hesitant version of the warrior. Every time he looked at his comrades, he couldn't help but wonder, did they truly see him as a hero again, or just a convenient weapon to win the war? His anger wasn't just aimed at the Greeks, it was also directed inward. The years on Lemnos had changed him. He had endured more than most heroes, and in his solitude he had reflected on his own identity and his place in the larger world. Now that he was back among the very people who had once discarded him, Philoctetes struggled with feelings of worthlessness and doubt. Was he just a pawn in a larger game of war, or was his place in the world more meaningful than the betrayal that had defined so much of his life? As the Greek forces prepared for another attack on Troy, Philoctetes' role became clearer. The warriors were desperate. The battle needed Heracles' bow, and only Philoctetes could wield it. Yet even as he took up the legendary weapon once again, he couldn't shake the feeling of being used. This wasn't the glorious return he had imagined. It wasn't a triumph of heroism, but rather a forced reconciliation with those who had betrayed him. He had been the forgotten hero, but now, just as he had predicted, they wanted him back to solve their problems. Philoctetes knew that he couldn't simply forget the years of suffering and isolation. How could he forgive them so easily? The final test of his internal struggle came during the Trojan War's most critical moment, the battle against Paris, the Prince of Troy. The Greek prophecy had been clear. The war would end when Paris was slain by the arrow of Heracles' bow, and now Philoctetes stood poised to fulfill that prophecy. But as he drew the bowstring back and aimed at Paris, Philoctetes paused. The entire Trojan War had been defined by betrayals, deceit, and loss. Philoctetes had been abandoned by his comrades, and he had come to resent the very gods who had allowed his suffering to continue. And now, the moment had come. He could end it all. But as he stood there, Poised to strike, something within him hesitated. Was this his moment for redemption, or was he still in some way simply the hero who was summoned only when needed? In that moment, Philoctetes understood something profound. True heroism wasn't about individual glory, nor was it about seeking revenge on those who had wronged him. It was about purpose, about fulfilling a greater role in the world, despite the suffering and pain that had come before. He had the power to end the war, and in doing so he could bring peace to his people, even if it meant sacrificing the bitterness he still held. With that realization, Philoctetes released the arrow. The shot was true. Paris fell, and the Trojan War came to its fated conclusion. In that moment, Philoctetes was no longer the man left behind. He was the hero who fulfilled his destiny. The very bow that had been gifted by Heracles now fulfilled its purpose, bringing an end to the war and securing Philoctetes' place in the annals of Greek myth. After the Trojan War ended and the Greeks returned to their homes, Philoctetes' role in the fall of Troy became a symbol not only of victory, but of personal resilience and forgiveness. His actions during the final stages of the war proved that heroism was not just about battle prowess, but also about understanding the cost of war and the importance of reconciliation. Though Philoctetes had been betrayed by the Greeks, his return to the fold and his role in the death of Paris had a profound effect on the Greek army. The story of his suffering on Lemnos and his forgiveness of those who had abandoned him became a powerful narrative. It served as a reminder that a true hero doesn't simply conquer enemies in battle, but also conquers their own inner struggles, overcoming the pain of betrayal and transforming it into something greater. Back in Thrace, where Philoctetes made his home, the hero was celebrated not just for his role in ending the Trojan War, but for the wisdom he brought back with him. The time he spent alone on Lemnos had given him a rare perspective on life, heroism, and humanity. Instead of seeking endless glory or revenge, Philoctetes became a figure of humility and leadership, teaching those who sought him out that the true path of a hero was not defined by endless conquest, but by the strength to forgive and the courage to rise above the past. Diomedes, one of the greatest warriors of the Trojan War, often sought Philoctetes' counsel, admiring the way Philoctetes had overcome such personal agony to become a hero of such magnitude. Though Diomedes himself had grown into a leader of the Greeks, he respected Philoctetes' approach to leadership, which was not about commanding with strength, but about understanding when to act and when to rely on others. Over time, Philoctetes became a symbol for many heroes who would follow in his footsteps. His story was told far and wide, not just for the way he had helped bring down Troy, but for the personal journey he had endured. Heroes like Achilles, Odysseus, and Nestor, all of whom had their own complicated relationships with the gods and fate, saw in Philoctetes a reflection of their own struggles. They saw that a hero was not just a warrior, but a person who could rise above pain, forgive those who wronged them, and find the strength to continue, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Philoctetes' journey was not just about fighting in the Trojan War or defeating enemies. It was about the emotional battle that came with the warrior's life, the cost of betrayal, the pain of abandonment, and the burden of isolation. He became the living embodiment of what it meant to be a hero, who was tested by the most difficult challenges, not just in the physical world, but in the inner world of forgiveness, acceptance, and redemption. The impact of Philoctetes' story was also felt in how heroes viewed their relationship with the gods. Though Philoctetes had been abandoned by the Greeks and left to suffer on Lemnos, he had never turned his back on the gods. In fact, his ultimate victory was a testament to his understanding that strength came not from individual might, but from the divine connection he had maintained despite his suffering. His bow, a gift from Heracles, was an artifact of the gods, but it was Philoctetes' character, his willingness to forgive, and his inner strength that made him the true hero. When the younger generations of heroes looked to Philoctetes, they saw him as an example of grit and grace under pressure. His name became synonymous with the idea that true heroism didn't mean always fighting for glory. It meant understanding your place in the world, embracing your weaknesses, and knowing when to act for the greater good. In the later years of his life, Philoctetes became more than just a war hero. He was a mentor, a figure to whom other heroes came for advice, not on how to swing a sword, but on how to navigate life's trials. It was not the bloodied victories that defined him, but the moral victory he had earned over his own suffering. he showed that a hero could be someone who faced both external battles and inner struggles, and that true strength lay in overcoming not just the enemy in front of you, but the enemy within. The legacy of Philoctetes was one of transformation, showing that heroism was not a fixed state. It was a journey. It was a path of redemption, of overcoming pain and forgiving those who wronged you, and of realizing that even in the most difficult times, a hero's purpose could be greater than individual glory. In the world of Greek heroes, where every warrior seemed to be born with either a magic sword or divine parentage, Ajax the Greater was like the bouncer at the door to heroism. He wasn't just big, he was huge. You know the type of guy who walks into a room and people stop mid-conversation just to say, "Whoa, did a mountain just walk in?" That was Ajax. Born to Telamon, king of Salamis, and Hesione, the daughter of a Trojan king, Ajax was destined to be the biggest guy at the party, the one who always had a snack in his hand, and the one who could break a shield in half with a single flex. Okay, maybe a slight exaggeration, but you get the idea. As a kid, Ajax wasn't exactly the quiet, bookish type. Imagine the Hulk after too many energy drinks. That was Ajax, running around and breaking things. His dad, Telamon, was also a warrior, which meant that little Ajax had no chance of being anything less than the toughest kid on the block. And of course, Ajax's training didn't just consist of swordplay and shield drills. No, he had to learn the ancient art of carrying around a shield so big that it could probably double as a small island. It was almost as if Ajax was destined to be a walking, talking fortress. His oxhide shield became the stuff of legend, and the only thing bigger than his shield was probably his ego, but in a very charming, I'm the biggest, but I'm also the nicest kind of way. Now, Ajax didn't just get his legendary bow and huge shield by accident. He was granted Heracles' bow, yes, that Heracles, the guy who could kill a lion with a look. Philoctetes, a fellow hero, was supposed to be the new owner of Heracles' bow, but when Heracles decided he had better things to do than, not die, he handed the weapon off to Ajax, marking the start of Ajax's real rise to hero status. His bow wasn't just any bow, it was divinely crafted, and probably had more power than most gods themselves. But Ajax, he just thought, yeah, seems like a pretty solid addition to my already ridiculous arsenal. When the Trojan War kicked off, Ajax the Greater was like, alright, time to show these Trojans what a real warrior looks like. He wasn't just showing up to fight, he was showing up to dominate. On the battlefield, Ajax wasn't just the guy swinging his sword, he was the guy who would bop you on the head, leaving you wondering if you'd just been hit by a flying mountain. His shield was so big it practically had its own zip code, and the mere sight of it caused Trojan soldiers to drop their weapons in sheer awe. In fact, Ajax could have probably won the war by simply standing still, his shield blocking all the Trojan arrows while he casually took a nap. As a hero, Ajax was the no-nonsense type. There were other heroes who were all about their fancy speeches or playing the godly charm game, but Ajax, he just showed up, swung his big sword and said, let's get this over with. His philosophy was simple. If you wanted to defeat a Trojan, you hit them until they couldn't stand up anymore, and that's exactly what Ajax the Greater did. He swung his giant sword with efficiency, not finesse. He was the blue-collar hero of the Greek army, working hard, barely breaking a sweat, and walking off the battlefield like it was just another Tuesday. But Ajax's greatness wasn't only about his physical strength. No, what really set him apart was his honour. He was a man of principles, a guy who believed that being a hero wasn't just about crushing the enemy, it was about doing the right thing, whether that was defending his comrades or sticking to his word. The only thing more massive than his body was his sense of justice. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing for Ajax, because, well, there's always that one guy who has to get in your way. For Ajax, that guy was Achilles. Achilles, who was also big, strong, and had a god backing him up, had a tendency to steal the spotlight. Ajax wasn't the type to let his ego get in the way, but it did create a bit of a friendly competition. While Achilles may have been the flashier hero, Ajax had the brawn, and his shield became the embodiment of no-nonsense heroism. If there's one thing that can be said about Ajax the Greater, it's that he didn't waste any time trying to impress anyone, he just did his job, and made sure everyone knew it. The Trojan War had its fair share of flashy heroes. The ones who like to make dramatic speeches before plunging into battle, or the ones who sparkle in the sunlight while they fight. Ajax, however, was more of the I'm here to punch stuff and go home kind of guy. When the Greeks landed at Troy, Ajax wasted no time making his presence felt. While other warriors spent hours preparing and strategizing, Ajax was already charging in, swinging his enormous sword at anything that moved. It didn't matter if you were a Trojan soldier or a hungry horse. If you were within reach, you were getting hit. He didn't care about getting fancy kills or looking heroic. Ajax had one mission: destroy stuff, and he did it better than anyone. The Trojan War was like a badly organised family reunion. Lots of screaming, arguing, and people trying to one-up each other. Achilles, of course, was the family favourite, the guy everyone wanted to have over for dinner, while Ajax was the slightly more underappreciated cousin who didn't need the spotlight to show everyone who was truly the strongest. Sure, Achilles had that godly edge, but Ajax didn't need divine intervention. He was all about the brute force, and that was enough to get him noticed. One of Ajax's biggest feats came when the Greeks were under siege and things were looking bleak. Achilles, the hero of the hour, had pulled out of the fighting, thanks to a little bit of a temper tantrum typical, leaving the Greeks in a bit of a bind. Ajax stepped up, his giant shield raised high, ready to defend his comrades. He didn't care about the glory, he cared about the mission, and the mission was to keep the Trojan forces from overrunning the Greek camp. The Trojans didn't expect Ajax to stand alone against their might, but that's exactly what he did. For hours, Ajax defended the Greek camp, standing his ground as the Trojans surged forward. It was like a blockbuster movie, with Ajax as the reluctant hero who simply would not go down. He didn't need a fancy speech or a cool sidekick. He just needed his shield and his raw power to keep the Trojans at bay. Ajax was, in essence, the hero who brought back the simple heroism of just do your job. While the Trojans were able to breach the walls of Troy at some points, Ajax was there, steadfast, never faltering. If he couldn't win the war, he was at least going to make sure the Trojans knew they couldn't win without him. The epic shield battles between Ajax and the Trojans became legendary, and the Greeks started to realize you could not win this war without Ajax on your team. Despite his unquestionable skill, Ajax's role in the Trojan War was also defined by his loyalty to his comrades, particularly to Agamemnon. Though he could have easily stepped into the leadership role and claimed the title of the war's chief commander, he humbly accepted his position as one of the great warriors. For Ajax, it wasn't about the title, the power, or the fame. It was about fighting the good fight. That's not to say Ajax didn't have his prideful moments, though. When it came time for the Greek heroes to choose their champions in the contest for Achilles' armour, Ajax and Odysseus were the main contenders. Ajax understandably thought he should get the armour. After all, he had been the rock for the Greek army, keeping things together when everyone else was busy acting dramatic. Odysseus, the man of words and cunning, ended up winning the armour, which to Ajax felt like a slap in the face. In the end, Ajax didn't need the armour or the prizes. He was already a hero in his own right. But that didn't mean he wasn't a little miffed by the politics of the battlefield, because let's face it, Ajax wasn't just a mighty warrior, he was also a guy who knew he deserved some credit. When you've been the one holding the line for most of the war, a little recognition doesn't seem too much to ask, does it? The Trojan War had reached its peak. The Greeks were worn, weary, and desperate. Their best warriors, Achilles, Odysseus, and Ajax, had fought for years, each carrying the weight of the conflict in different ways. But even in the midst of such grueling warfare, one moment would change Ajax the Greater forever: the contest for Achilles' armour. After the tragic death of Achilles, the Greeks found themselves without their greatest warrior. A decision had to be made as to who would take Achilles' place in terms of not only leadership, but also his weapons, most notably his magnificent armour. The armour, forged by the gods, was a symbol of divine favour and immense power. Ajax, who had been steadfast and unyielding throughout the war, assumed that the armour was his by right. After all, he was the one who had been standing firm on the front lines when others had faltered. He had defended the Greek camp, led battles, and fought like a man possessed. It only seemed fitting that he should be the one to wear Achilles' armour, to honour his fallen comrade and carry on his legacy. But Odysseus, the brilliant tactician and master of words, also claimed the armour, arguing that his cunning and intelligence had been key to many of the Greeks' victories. Ajax wasn't just upset by the decision, he was furious. It wasn't that Odysseus didn't deserve honour for his contributions, it was that Ajax had been in the trenches, had bled for the cause, and in his mind, Odysseus had been playing politics to get what should have been his. When Odysseus was chosen as the victor of the contest, Ajax's pride took a hit. It wasn't just about the armour, it was about recognition. Ajax, for all his strength, humility and honour, had an ego that could be bruised. He believed he deserved to be honoured for his actions. For him, the armour was the ultimate symbol of his place in the war, a place he had earned through sacrifice, bravery, and the sheer fact that he'd never backed down. Feeling betrayed by the very people he had fought for, Ajax fell into a dark place. His internal conflict turned from frustration to humiliation. He struggled with the feeling that honour in the war had become a political game, and he was losing to someone who, in his mind, had played that game better. In his grief and anger, Ajax began to spiral. He felt that if he wasn't a hero to the Greeks, then he wasn't a hero at all. He had no place in a world where merit was overshadowed by political manoeuvring and manipulation. His sense of self was crumbling, and he felt like his identity was wrapped up in others' perceptions of him. In a desperate moment, Ajax retreated from the Greek camp, driven by thoughts of vengeance and revenge against those who had wronged him. He became disillusioned with the war, feeling that it no longer held the same purpose for him. The notion of honour, which had guided him for so long, had been twisted and corrupted by the actions of those around him. Then came the turning point. In the middle of his rage and self-pity, Ajax considered taking his own life. He felt alone, betrayed, and stripped of the one thing that had made him who he was, his honour. But in the depths of his despair, a vision appeared. It was not a god who came to him, but rather his own inner voice, reminding him of what had truly mattered in his life: the battles fought, the comrades who stood beside him, and the honour he had always carried with him, no matter the circumstance. As he stood on the edge of despair, Ajax realised that true heroism didn't come from external recognition or rewards. It wasn't about the armour, the glory, or the fame. It was about the choices you made and the integrity you carried in your soul. The armour wasn't going to change who he was. What mattered was that Ajax had always been a hero in his own right. He had fought for the right reasons, had defended the Greek cause, and had done it all with honour, even if no one else could see it. But in his final act of defiance against his pain, Ajax did something that not only changed his fate, but that of the Greeks as well. In the wake of his conflicted emotions, he gathered himself and confronted his own demons, and he came to the heartbreaking decision to take his life, not out of shame, but as a way to demonstrate the cost of unacknowledged honour. Ajax the Greater was dead. The news rippled across the Greek camp like a storm. The soldiers, the leaders, and even the gods, who had always seen Ajax as a giant among men, were shaken by the sudden and tragic loss. His death was a staggering blow, not just because of the loss of a great warrior, but because it represented the soul-crushing reality of war, where even the mightiest heroes could be undone not just by the sword, but by pride, betrayal, and internal conflict. In the Greek army, Ajax was a symbol of unwavering loyalty and strength. He was the one who had held the line when Achilles had withdrawn, the one who fought tirelessly, not for personal glory, but for the greater good of the Greek cause. He was a force of nature, unstoppable on the battlefield, yet beneath the armour and brute strength, he had always carried a sense of honour and principle. His heroism was rooted in his sense of duty to his comrades, and his willingness to stand alone if necessary for the greater cause. Yet, in the end, Ajax's death was not the heroic battle death one might expect for such a legendary warrior. Instead, it was the product of internal turmoil, a loss of honour, a crushing blow to pride, and a desperate act of finality. His decision to take his own life was a reflection of his mental fragility, a soul-searching moment where his own honour could no longer reconcile with the actions and politics of his fellow warriors. In the wake of Ajax's death, the Greek leaders, especially Agamemnon, Menelaus and Odysseus, were forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. They had always relied on Ajax to be the unquestionable protector of their forces, the indomitable hero who could not be swayed by personal grievance or ego. Now, in his absence, they faced not just a military void, but a moral one, a loss of trust, a reminder that even the strongest of men were vulnerable to the toll of war. Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief of the Greek army, had often been at odds with Ajax over leadership, but the loss of Ajax forced him to see the cracks in the Greek army. the internal fractures that had existed even among the greatest warriors. It was now clear to him that, despite their strength, the Greek leaders had failed to protect the mental well-being of their heroes. Achilles had already left the war in fury over his insult regarding Brosis, and now Ajax, who had been loyal to the core, had died because of a sense of humiliation and betrayal. Agamemnon, for all his tactical genius, had failed to see the human side of war, the emotional cost that came with constant battle, public recognition, and personal glory. While Odysseus had been the more politically astute and cunning hero, he could not escape the weight of Ajax's death either. His intellect had won him Achilles' armour, but now, with Ajax's death, he realised the real price of that victory. For all the honour that Odysseus had earned in his leadership, he could not help but feel a sense of guilt. He had beaten Ajax in the contest for Achilles' armour, a contest Ajax had felt was his by right, but the reality of the situation haunted him. Odysseus' triumph felt hollow, like a victory that had been bought at too great a cost. Ajax, with all his humility, had been the hero the army needed, and Odysseus wondered if the price of that armour was worth the loss of a warrior who had been so vital to their success. The Trojans, who had fought long and hard against the Greek forces, were not without their own sense of loss. While Ajax was certainly their enemy, even they knew the value of such a formidable foe. There was a mutual respect between the warriors, one that went beyond the boundaries of the battlefield. Hector, who had once faced Ajax on the front lines, admired the Greek hero's strength and resolve. Ajax's death was felt on both sides of the war. For the Trojans, it wasn't just a matter of victory. It was the loss of a warrior whose bravery had forced them to fight harder than ever before. In the Greek camp, the reaction to Ajax's death was a mixture of grief, shock, and guilt. The Greeks gave him a heroic funeral, but no amount of ceremony could erase the reality of the loss. Ajax the Greater had been the bedrock of their defence, and now that he was gone, the weight of his absence loomed large. His shield, once the symbol of their strength, now became the symbol of the price of honour and warfare, the sacrifice that was required for victory. As for Ajax's legacy, it became a tragic yet powerful symbol. His story was one of valour, but it was also a stark reminder that war was not just about the physical battles, but about the mental and emotional toll it took on those who fought it. His tale echoed through the years, resonating with future generations of heroes who would learn from his downfall that honour, while a noble pursuit, could also be the very thing that broke a man. In the future, heroes like Heracles, Achilles and Diomedes would not just be known for their strengths, but also for their mental resilience, understanding that true heroism required balance, self-awareness, and the courage to face one's inner demons. In the wake of Ajax the Greater's tragic death, the Greek army was forced to confront the deep emotional cost of war. The hero who had once been their strongest defender, who had stood like a wall against the tide of the Trojan forces, was no longer there. His absence was felt deeply, not just by his comrades, but by the entire war effort. His shield, the emblem of his strength and honour, was now a symbol of the true cost of war. It wasn't just about the battles fought, but about the mental battles heroes faced long after the dust settled. The Greeks gave Ajax a heroic funeral, as befitted one of their greatest warriors. His death was not forgotten, and his burial was marked with rituals, eulogies, and an outpouring of grief. Odysseus, who had competed with Ajax for Achilles' armour, was among the most affected. Though he had won the armour, he knew that the price of Ajax's death was far steeper than any victory in battle could ever be. Yet it was Odysseus, the master of words, who recognised the true significance of Ajax's life and death. In a moment of reflection, he acknowledged that Ajax the Greater had been the very heart of the Greek war effort, the one who had held their defences together when Achilles was withdrawn from battle. Odysseus saw that Ajax's story was a lesson, that heroism wasn't just about strength, glory, or the ability to fight. It was about the ability to endure, to face the worst of yourself and still stand for what was right. Ajax had done that. However, the Greeks also realised that the price of Ajax's death went beyond honour and grief. His tragic end forced them to reckon with the emotional toll that warfare took on their heroes. Agamemnon and Menelaus, the leaders of the Greek forces, knew they had been negligent in understanding the psychological needs of their warriors. They had been so focused on victory that they hadn't stopped to consider the mental resilience their warriors needed to maintain. Ajax, like Achilles, had been mentally scarred by the war, but his scars were different. His honour had been his burden. He had carried it alone, and it had ultimately broken him. In the years that followed, Ajax the Greater became a legend not just for his physical strength, but for the tragic nature of his story. His tale became a cautionary one. It was a reminder to future heroes that the true battle was not just fought on the field, but in the mind. The greatness of a hero was measured not only by the fame they garnered or the battles they won, but by their ability to cope with loss, to live with honour, and to find strength in moments of weakness. The next generation of heroes, especially those like Diomedes, Teucer, and Achilles' son Neoptolemus, would be influenced by Ajax's story. They would understand that victory came with costs, physical, emotional, and spiritual. They would carry Ajax's legacy forward, but not just through their swords and shields. They would remember him as the hero who had been the best of them all, but who had ultimately been brought low not by Trojans, but by the weight of his own honour. His death taught them that no hero was invincible, and that mental resilience was just as vital as physical strength. Teucer, Ajax's brother, was among those who carried his legacy forward. Teucer, who had seen Ajax's might on the battlefield and understood his mental struggles, swore to uphold his brother's name. Though he never attained the same level of fame as Ajax the Greater, he would always be remembered as Ajax's legacy, standing as a hero who did not repeat his brother's tragic fate, but embraced the lessons that Ajax's life and death had imparted. Ajax the Greater's story also resonated in the broader scope of Greek mythology, where he was remembered as one of the greatest warriors to ever fight in the Trojan War. His tragic end became a symbol for the high price of war, a reminder that even the mightiest heroes were not immune to the psychological toll of battle. The Greeks would continue to fight, but they would also acknowledge the cost of their struggle, not just in terms of lives lost, but in terms of the emotional cost borne by those who survived. His shield, once the emblem of his strength, became a metaphor for the burdens that heroes carried. It was no longer just a symbol of protection and defence, but also a reminder that strength came with the responsibility to look after the mental well-being of those who fought for it. Ajax's death forced a change in how the Greeks viewed their warriors, not just as tools of war, but as individuals with their own struggles, needs, and traumas. In the grand tapestry of Greek heroes, Ancaeus often goes underappreciated. While names like Jason, Heracles, and Orpheus dominate the tales of the Argonauts, Ancaeus played a vital role that is often overlooked. He was the helmsman of the Argo, the one responsible for steering the ship through the most dangerous waters the Argonauts would encounter. If a hero's strength lies in the ability to guide and lead, then Ancaeus was no less a hero than the mighty Heracles or the cunning Jason. Ancaeus was a son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and like many of his divine relatives, he was bestowed with an intimate understanding of the sea. But unlike his more famous relatives, who would go on to great fame for their labours or battles, Ancaeus found his place among the Argonauts as a guide and protector of the crew's most precious asset, the Argo. His knowledge of the sea and the way the waves moved were unparalleled, and his calm demeanour in the face of danger made him the perfect choice to helm the ship. But Ancaeus's background wasn't just about his sea knowledge. Born to Poseidon and a mortal woman, he grew up with an inherent understanding of nature's forces, especially the turbulent and unpredictable sea. He didn't possess the strength of a warrior like Heracles or the charm of Jason, but his deep connection to the sea gave him the unique ability to understand the rhythm of the waters and the patterns of the winds. Growing up, Ancaeus was often called upon to calm the seas and to help those lost on the water find their way. Whether it was helping to steer ships through dangerous storms or guiding sailors on long voyages, Ancaeus became known as the Master of the Waves, an expert navigator, capable of guiding even the most tempestuous ships through the roughest waters. When Jason gathered the greatest heroes of Greece for his quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece, Ancaeus was an obvious choice to serve as the helmsman of the Argo. While Jason sought warriors, Ancaeus's skills were more intellectual, his true strength lying in his ability to read the sea and keep the ship on course, no matter the dangers that lay ahead. It wasn't long after setting sail that Ancaeus's abilities proved indispensable. The Argonauts were heading into unknown waters, and the journey would bring them face to face with mythical creatures, violent storms, and treacherous enemies. For all the strength and bravery of the Argonauts, It was Ancaeus who ensured that the ship stayed afloat, who was there to steady the helm when the sea raged and the skies darkened. While Ancaeus didn't possess the brawn of Heracles or the leadership of Jason, his unshakable calm in the face of danger was what kept the crew moving forward. Without Ancaeus, the Argonauts would have been adrift, literally and figuratively. His steady hand at the helm was the true mark of his heroism. In a world full of brawn, Ancaeus showed that sometimes the greatest strength lay in quiet competence and determination. The Argonauts were a group of heroes who each brought something remarkable to the table. Heracles brought his unmatched strength, Orpheus brought his music that could charm the wildest beasts, and Jason brought his leadership skills. But there was one thing that set them apart from every other group of adventurers in Greek mythology. They had Ancaeus at the helm of their ship, the Argo. While many of the Argonauts were accustomed to fighting monsters or seeking treasure, Ancaeus's talents lay in an area few others in the crew could claim. His ability to navigate the sea, reading the weather, tides and winds with unparalleled skill. This was no small feat considering the many dangers the Argonauts would face on their journey. When they set sail from Iolcus, their journey was full of unknowns. Jason had gathered the greatest heroes of Greece, but without someone capable of safely steering the ship through dangerous waters, their quest could easily have ended before it had begun. Ancaeus, born of Poseidon and a mortal woman, understood the sea in a way few others could. His affinity for the ocean wasn't just about navigating, it was about understanding its moods, knowing when the waters were calm and when they were ready to unleash their fury. One of the earliest challenges the Argonauts faced came when they sailed into the Bosphorus, the narrow and perilous strait that led them toward the Black Sea. The clashing rocks, massive, ever-moving stones that slammed together, destroying anything in their path, lay ahead. The crew had heard of these rocks, and Jason's strategy was to launch the Argo through the gap before the rocks could collide. But even the best-laid plans had to be executed flawlessly, and this was where Ancaeus stepped in. He had already been quietly observing the movements of the rocks from the moment they entered the strait. As the Argonauts prepared to make their move, it was Ancaeus who noticed the timing, the exact moment when the rocks would separate just enough to let them pass. With a calm hand on the wheel, Ancaeus guided the Argo through the narrowest of gaps. As the Argonauts passed through the rocks, the massive stones smashed behind them with a terrifying crash. But thanks to Ancaeus's unshakable calm and expertise, they were already through and well on their way, leaving the dangerous rocks behind them. The crew cheered in relief, but Ancaeus simply nodded, his focus already shifting to the next obstacle. For him, this wasn't just about navigating the sea, it was about reading it, understanding it, and guiding the crew through its ever-changing tides. But Ancaeus's most crucial moment came when the Argonauts encountered the Sirens, the creatures whose songs were so enchanting that they lured sailors to their deaths. The Argonauts were warned that they would soon encounter the Sirens' deadly melody, and Jason asked his crew to prepare accordingly. Some of the Argonauts, such as Orpheus, had their own methods of dealing with the Sirens, but Ancaeus saw things a little differently. With his deep connection to the sea and the rhythms of the world, Ancaeus understood that fighting the Sirens with brute strength or magic would not work. The Sirens weren't beasts to be slain. They were forces of nature. They needed to be outsmarted. Ancaeus, instead of rushing to confront the Sirens head-on, suggested that the Argonauts sail through the dangerous waters as quickly as possible, using their skills and strategy to navigate around the Sirens rather than engaging them directly. Orpheus, hearing the proposal, agreed to play his music in return, keeping the Argonauts distracted while Ancaeus steered the ship through the waves, guiding them past the Sirens without falling prey to their deadly song. Though Orpheus's music provided the shield they needed, it was Ancaeus who ensured that the Argo remained on course, sailing as swiftly as possible through this dangerous strait. With his steady hand on the wheel, the Argonauts passed the Sirens unharmed, not through battle but through wisdom and careful navigation. Through these challenges, Ancaeus proved that his abilities went far beyond just knowing the waters. His cool-headed nature, his strategic thinking, and his deep understanding of the world around him made him indispensable to the Argonauts. Without him, the Argo would not have made it through the clashing rocks. Without his keen mind, they might have fallen victim to the Sirens, as so many sailors had before them. Though Ancaeus was not the loudest or most charismatic of the Argonauts, his role was one of quiet but vital importance. He didn't need the accolades or the glory of victory. His heroism was seen in his steady presence, in his ability to lead the ship through both literal and figurative storms, and in the calm wisdom that he provided to the crew at the helm. As the Argonauts sailed on their legendary quest for the Golden Fleece, they encountered one peril after another. Yet amid these physical and supernatural threats, Ancaeus began to face his own personal turning point, a moment of reflection that would reshape his understanding of his role within the group and the nature of heroism. While Ancaeus had always prided himself on his unparalleled skills as a helmsman and his calm under pressure, he began to realize that the journey would require more than just the ability to navigate through storms and calm the seas. The Argonauts were a band of heroes, each bringing their own powers and skills to the table, and it was becoming increasingly clear that Ancaeus would have to evolve in order to be more than just a member of the crew who stood at the helm. The turning point came when the Argonauts encountered the mighty Hydra, a multi-headed serpent that terrorized the land of Lerna. As Jason and the other Argonauts geared up for battle, Ancaeus was faced with a dilemma. The Hydra's heads were said to regenerate every time they were cut off, making the monster virtually invincible. Even the bravery and strength of heroes like Heracles and Theseus could do little to stop the creature without the right strategy. For Ancaeus, it was the first time in the quest that his navigation skills weren't the primary solution to the problem at hand. His role had always been clear: steer the ship, guide the crew through the dangers of the sea and keep them on course. But how could he help fight a creature that was not bound by geography or tides? In the face of this challenge, Ancaeus began to question his place among the group. Could he be more than just the navigator? Could he fight as his comrades did, and take part in the physical challenges they faced? His internal conflict came to a head when he realized that his skills, though critical to the Argonauts' survival up until that point, were not enough to guarantee victory against the Hydra. It was then that Ancaeus learned a hard truth. Heroes don't operate in a vacuum. True heroism was not about one person or even one skill. It was about working together, each person bringing something to the table and contributing to the success of the whole. Ancaeus stood alongside his comrades, offering what advice he could on how best to approach the fight. But instead of rushing into the fray, he took on a new role, one of a strategist, a collaborator. He realized that while he couldn't defeat the Hydra himself, he could help by offering insights into how the team could use their strengths to bring down the creature. He coordinated efforts between the fighters, keeping the team focused and calm during the battle, just as he had done when he steered the Argo through dangerous waters. The Hydra was eventually defeated not by one person or one weapon, but through the teamwork of the Argonauts. Heracles struck the final blow, but it was Ancaeus' strategic input, his guidance, and his ability to remain calm under pressure that helped the group succeed. This battle was the moment that marked Ancaeus' true transformation from a quiet, unseen hero into a central figure who had learned the importance of teamwork and collaboration. In the aftermath of the Hydra's defeat, Ancaeus came to a profound realization. Heroism was not about individual glory or the ability to fight alone. It was about understanding your place in the group, learning to adapt, and contributing in the ways that mattered most. He understood now that his gifts, while crucial, were only part of what made him a hero. It was his ability to listen, adapt, and work with others that made him truly indispensable. After the defeat of the Hydra, the Argonauts continued their journey, but the battle left an indelible mark on Ancaeus. It was the first time that he had truly confronted the limits of his abilities. He had always been the one who kept the ship on course, who had the wisdom to read the winds and tides and guide the Argo through dangerous seas. But facing the Hydra, a monster whose power was beyond simple navigation or physical might, had challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The victory over the Hydra, won through teamwork and strategy, had proved invaluable. Ancaeus had played a crucial role, not by striking a blow with a weapon, but by guiding the team, providing support, and keeping everyone focused on the bigger picture. He had proven that leadership wasn't just about strength, but about recognizing when to step back and allow others to shine, while offering advice and direction when needed. Despite this realization, Ancaeus found himself struggling emotionally in the aftermath. The victory was sweet, but it left him with a sense of insecurity. His internal struggle revolved around the fact that, for the first time in his life, he had failed to act decisively in battle. He had always been the one who took control of the situation, but now he had to come to terms with the fact that his greatest strength, his ability to read the sea and navigate the ship, wasn't always enough in the face of monstrous enemies. As the journey continued, Ancaeus found himself becoming more reflective. He spent hours alone on the deck of the Argo, watching the water, lost in thought. The winds that had once been his trusted allies now felt distant. He questioned whether he was truly worthy of being a hero, given that he hadn't fought in the way the others had. While the Argonauts celebrated their victories, Ancaeus couldn't shake the feeling that he had been just an observer, someone who had been too afraid to step out of his comfort zone and act when it truly mattered. The defining moment of his internal struggle came during another trial. This time, a storm sent by Zeus himself. As the Argo sailed into a violent squall, the ship began to rock violently, and the crew had to act quickly to avoid being thrown off course. Jason called for Ancaeus to steer the ship through the storm, but Ancaeus hesitated. The storm was unlike anything he had ever seen. The winds howled and the waves rose higher than the ship's mast. Ancaeus, who had always relied on his ability to calm the sea and guide the ship through storms, suddenly felt overwhelmed. For the first time in his life, he doubted his ability to steer them through this challenge. "I can't do it," he muttered to himself, staring into the churning sea. "What if I fail them? What if I can't protect the ship this time?" But just as he began to succumb to his fear, Jason appeared by his side, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Ancaeus, we've trusted you this far," Jason said calmly. "We don't need perfection. We need you to trust yourself and keep us on course. You've always been the one who guides us." The words were simple, but they cut through Ancaeus' self-doubt like a knife through fog. Ancaeus looked at the crew, the very people he had travelled alongside through thick and thin, and realised that they believed in him. He wasn't just the man at the helm, he was an integral part of their journey. Calais, Heracles, Orpheus and the others had all played their roles, but he had always been the one who kept them moving forward through the storm. With newfound resolve, Ancaeus stepped up to the helm, his hand steady as he grasped the wheel. He used his knowledge of the seas, his connection to the winds, and the lessons he had learned in his journey to guide the Argo through the storm. For hours he worked tirelessly, steering the ship with precision, even as the sky above darkened and the waves grew fiercer. In the end, it wasn't just his skill that saved them, it was the realization that heroism wasn't about acting alone. Ancaeus had always believed that he was solely responsible for the ship's safety, but now he saw that true leadership was about accepting help, working with others, and trusting in the team that had always believed in him. Ancaeus had found his place, not just at the helm, but as part of a larger community of heroes. By the time the Argonauts neared the end of their journey, the changes in Ancaeus were clear to everyone. The Argo had made it through every perilous trial, and Ancaeus, once merely the helmsman who steered the ship, had become an integral part of the team, not just in his ability to guide the vessel, but in his newfound understanding of leadership and teamwork. After the storm, where he had faced his own doubts, Ancaeus became more than just a navigator. He was trusted and respected by the crew for his calm demeanour, his intelligence, and the humility with which he had approached his transformation. The Argonauts had faced literal monsters, storms, and divine tests, but Ancaeus had come to understand that the greatest challenge of all was the one that had taken place within himself. During the final stage of their journey, as they sailed toward Iolcus, the Argonauts had to confront the repercussions of their quest. Their success with the Golden Fleece had been hard-earned, and the gods had made it clear that not every victory came without consequence. Eats, still angered by their theft of the fleece, sent one last trial in an attempt to delay the Argonauts' return. The challenge was simple yet deadly. A flood of monstrous creatures, including sea serpents and other mythical beasts, had been unleashed upon the crew. Ancaeus, who had steered the Argo through countless dangers, now had to face the fact that he would need to navigate them through treacherous waters again. But this time, it wasn't just the sea that posed the danger. The creatures were attacking from all sides, and the Argonauts' usual tactics weren't working. It was clear that brute force wasn't enough. Ancaeus had to think quickly, and for the first time in a long time, he was challenged not just as a helmsman, but as a strategist and leader. The monsters were too many and too fast to fight head-on, and the Argo was now too large and cumbersome to maneuver through the aggressive sea creatures without being attacked. This time, The Argonauts couldn't rely on Herculean strength or flying speed. They would need to outthink the attack. And it was in this moment of crisis that Ancaeus remembered the core lesson he had learned during his time with the Hydra and the earlier storm. True strength lay in thinking ahead, in working together. He quickly devised a plan to steer the Argo through the flooded waters, while using the Argonauts' unique abilities to their advantage. He had Orpheus play a song to calm some of the creatures, while Jason, Heracles and the rest of the warriors dealt with those that couldn't be pacified. Ancaeus' role was crucial. He guided the ship with incredible precision, dodging the attacking creatures and ensuring that the ship stayed on course. The Argonauts had been facing trials where strength alone couldn't guarantee success. Ancaeus had learned that a calm mind and a steady hand were just as important as the courage to fight. When the sea serpents were finally subdued and the monsters began to retreat, Ancaeus stood at the helm of the Argo, exhausted but fulfilled. For the first time, he realized that his true role was not just about steering the ship. It was about understanding when to guide, when to act, and when to trust the abilities of those around him. As the Argonauts reached Iolcus, the city they had set out from so long ago, Ancaeus knew that his journey had been one of both external adventure and internal transformation. He was no longer the quiet helmsman who had quietly steered the ship through the unknown. Ancaeus had become a true leader, a mentor, and a hero in his own right. His growth had allowed him to recognize the value of collaboration, to understand that heroism came not from individual strength, but from the ability to work together, to adapt, and to learn from the trials that life presented. As the Argonauts returned to Iolcus after their triumphant quest for the Golden Fleece, they were greeted as legends. Their names would be immortalized in myth, sung about in songs that would echo through the halls of time. Jason, Heracles, Orpheus, and the others would be remembered for their might and courage. Yet Ancaeus, the helmsman of the Argo, the one who guided them through countless dangers, would not be forgotten. His contribution, while not as immediately glamorous or visible as the feats of strength and heroism displayed by his comrades, had been crucial to the success of the Argonauts. Though Ancaeus was never the centre of attention, his quiet leadership became the bedrock upon which the Argonauts relied. His ability to keep the ship steady, no matter the storm or the monster they faced, gave the crew a sense of security. He wasn't the one to slay the Hydra or best the Cyclops in battle, but it was Ancaeus' steady hand at the helm that allowed them to reach their final destination. And it was his growth, his transformation from helmsman to strategist, from quiet observer to trusted leader, that would come to symbolize a deeper aspect of heroism. When Ancaeus returned to Thrace, he didn't seek the limelight. He didn't want statues erected in his honour, or songs sung about his victories. What mattered most to him was that he had played an integral part in a larger journey. His growth had been internal, and it was this quiet transformation that would leave a lasting legacy. In Thrace, Ancaeus was respected, not just for his divine heritage, but for the wisdom he had gained through his journey. As word of the Argonauts' triumph spread across Greece, younger heroes began to seek him out for advice. They came to him not only for navigation skills, but to learn the lessons he had picked up from the quest, the importance of patience, strategy, and collaboration. He became a mentor to the next generation, teaching young heroes that strength alone wasn't enough to guarantee success. Ancaeus showed them that wisdom and the ability to adapt were just as important as brute force. He often told them stories of his time with the Argonauts, focusing not on the battles they fought, but on the times when quick action had to be tempered with thoughtful planning. Calais and Zetes, the winged sons of Boreas, who had once relied so heavily on speed, came to Ancaeus to learn about the subtle art of leadership, the ability to think ahead, to guide others, and to remain calm in moments of crisis. In turn, Ancaeus learned from the brothers about the value of courage and impulsiveness, that sometimes quick action was necessary when the stakes were high. But what truly defined Ancaeus' legacy was his humility. Though he had been a key figure in the Argonauts' success, Ancaeus never sought fame. His name was passed down through stories, but never with the same loud acclaim as the others. He was the quiet hero, the one who led without demanding recognition. His greatest reward was in knowing that the Argonauts' journey was successful, that they had overcome the odds, and that he had played a part in that victory. His role was a reminder to future generations that every hero has a place in the greater story, and that no contribution, no matter how quiet, was ever too small. The Argonauts' triumph was a collective victory, built on the strengths of each member, each hero bringing something unique to the table. And Chaos's legacy would become a touchstone for the heroes who came after him, a symbol of the idea that true heroism came not from seeking fame, but from doing the right thing, from fulfilling your role in a way that served the greater good. As the years passed and Chaos's name became synonymous with wisdom and humility, he was remembered as one of the most thoughtful and strategic heroes of the Argonauts, a man who had guided his ship through the roughest seas and the darkest trials, not with brute strength, but with a steady hand and a calm mind. His legacy endured, not in the songs of the grandest battles, but in the quiet understanding that sometimes the most important victories were the ones won within, through personal growth, leadership, and a willingness to adapt.